Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Richards, and I am a librarian at Cleveland State University. And I'm happy to be here with you today presenting with the team on tracking affordability, data everywhere, but not a drop to drink. Our speakers' names are below, but each speaker will introduce themselves when it's their turn to present. Before we get started, I want to share just a short little bit of context about our institution. So we are at Cleveland State University, which is in Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States. We are a mid-sized urban public university, and we serve undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral students. The most recent IPEDS numbers put us at roughly 14,400 students, and about 2/3 of those are undergraduates. Roughly 40% of our undergraduate students receive Pell Grants, and we're largely a commuter school. On the staff side, our library has 24 full-time employees and 1 part-time employee, as well as several student employees, and we have around 1,000 faculty members. We are going to make some use of the chat today. So if you wouldn't mind, please share in the chat, yes or no, does your institution do any sort of tracking or assessment of your various affordability programs? And we'll take just a minute or so to do that. And I'm going to try and keep up with the chat. We are also going to save the chat and make it available via a URL that's already in our presentation, and the slides will be shared with you. But the gist of what I'm getting in the chat is that many of you do. Some express that there's some difficulty in doing that, but you do it anyways. And then a few of you are saying no, or kind of sort of. You're saying yes, you do it, but you don't have like a formal system of doing it. Okay, thanks so much. So I'm going to now turn things over to Mandi Goodsett, and she is going to share more about our affordability programs.
And hi, everybody. It's nice to see so many folks here. So my name is Mandi Goodsett, and I am the Performing Arts and Humanities Librarian at Cleveland State, as well as our Open Educational Resource and Copyright Advisor. So as far as I know, I'm the only person on campus with OER officially in my title. So I do a lot with our affordability efforts. And I started with that in 2018. Our library director was really kind of forward thinking in this area and got us started in 2016, exploring affordability and open education. And when she retired in 2018, she kind of turned things over to me. So we have been offering a textbook affordability grant through the library since 2016. And that grant initially was very wide open, but it has since really become a grant to encourage adaptation and creation of open materials. To some extent, it includes compiling free non-open materials as well. And then in more recent times, starting in, I want to say 2021, we actually, I think it was in 2020, we started offering a textbook affordability summer symposium as well, and that is funded by the provost office. That's more of a training opportunity for faculty, and that one encourages adoption of open or free materials. So those are kind of the two main programs where we try to collect data, especially our grant program. In addition, the library does have some other affordability initiatives. We have a textbook center, so we kind of set aside required textbooks that are in our collection and allow students to check them out for a couple of hours at a time. We don't generally actively collect textbooks because we couldn't possibly collect them all, but to some extent we strategically try to purchase required textbooks for classes that are really huge, that have expensive textbooks. And then we also sometimes get donations. We also have electronic course reserves and print course reserves for additional course materials that are not textbooks. And my colleague Beth will talk about that a little more later. And then we encourage faculty to adopt library licensed ebooks that we already pay for. And then we try to let faculty know if they have adopted a library licensed ebook, because sometimes they don't realize that students might be able to get access through the library to their required textbook. So we try to let them know about that as well. And as Ben said, you'll have access to these slides. So all of these links here you can explore in more detail if you would like. Next slide. So I have been the person who has been tracking our data starting in 2018, I would say. Before then, I don't even think we tracked very much data for our grant. But I will be the first to admit I do not have any expertise in like data management. And so I was kind of doing my best, but I'm very, very grateful to the other folks on this presentation who have stepped in and kind of helped to really improve our data collection. And they'll talk about kind of our plans to improve it even more. But until recently, we really just had the data that our grant applicants put into their application. So it was really just self-reported data. They would tell us how many students they typically have in their class and how many times that class is offered per academic year. And we just kind of went with that. Looking at it a little more deeply, we found that it's often not very accurate what they report. I don't think they're trying to be deceitful. They're just like not being very specific and not double checking their numbers. So I had all of this in a multi-tab spreadsheet, and I also didn't really have the capacity to follow up and see if faculty who went through a grant program continued to use whatever they had adopted in future offerings of that course. So that's another way that our data was not very complete or necessarily accurate. One kind of set of data that we still do collect, and I do encourage you all to think about, is just managing data about people. So I use Microsoft Lists, but I don't think you would need to do that. Essentially, any person on campus who has kind of touched our program in some way, who has interacted with the program, if they've gone to one of my workshops, or if they have applied for one of our grants, even if they didn't get a grant, or even if I just like pass them in the hall and I have a little conversation with them about their textbook choice or whatever it might be, I keep track of that in a big database. And then if I need to, for example, find a contact in a certain department, I can check my little database and see like, oh, I talked with someone 2 years ago, maybe that would be a good person to talk to. Or if I need to connect one faculty member with another who's done something similar to what the first faculty member wants to do, I can look that up in my little database. So that is one source of data that we probably will continue to collect that way. But now I'm going to turn it over to Ben to talk about some of the improvements in our data collection.
Thanks, Mandi. So we began to seek out a new way or a refined way of tracking the impact that we knew our OER grants were having in 2021, and that's when we were starting to think about how we would do more to promote the impact and also to celebrate a milestone that we thought we were coming up on. So during those discussions, we realized that we weren't very confident about the savings numbers or the enrollment numbers that we had for courses where the OERs were being used. And the numbers were coming from the faculty estimates again. So because we wanted to kind of make a big splash about our milestone and get the message out about our efforts and the efforts of our faculty to students, campus administration, maybe even hoping that this might get picked up by regional or local media, we knew we needed a more robust way of tracking savings and enrollments to calculate impact. And we wanted to ensure that any announcement we made was as accurate as possible. So the first step towards doing that was going back and getting historical enrollment data from our OER grant courses. And we did that by working with our institutional research department. We have a campus information system where you can go and get current semester enrollments manually. And I still do some of that sometimes. But anything going backwards in time is no longer available publicly on the university website. So we reached out to institutional research, assumed that they were going to be able to help us, and they were. It was more difficult than we had thought because the format that they use, they need like course IDs and section numbers, and we just had course names, English 102, Bio 101, and instructors who we knew or assumed were using OERs. So it took them longer to track down the right courses to pull data from because we didn't have the unique information. But they were able to provide us with tables of student enrollments. Another limitation of the data that they provided was that it was aggregated by course. So in some cases that wasn't a big deal because there was just one single offering of the course. But if we wanted section by section data, like which instructors were teaching using an OER, how many sections were reached, we didn't have that information. And it seems like it wasn't very easy for institutional research to produce it in that format at the time, at least. But that's okay. We had the historical information and we were able to start kind of fixing the numbers that we had for a more accurate projection. And after we did that, we started thinking about how we would more kind of future-proof our tracking efforts. So starting in 2021, for the current semesters, I began going in using Mandi's list of all of the grants and the courses that they are affiliated with, and using our campus information system to first verify that the instructor or other instructors for the course were actually using an OER or an affordable option. And so we would do that. Thankfully, in our campus information system, CampusNet, you can link directly from a section of a course to the bookstore listing. And I would check to see if there was a paid textbook included. And if it seemed like there was no textbook being assigned through the bookstore that students had to pay for, we would count that as an OER course. And then after that, I would record basically all the information that I could about the course: instructor, department, course name, section number, and then we call it a catalog number, but it's like a random 4-digit number. Anything that might be useful if we want to work with institutional research in the future is getting collected. And that goes all into a big spreadsheet that spans multiple semesters. And I'm not going to spend time talking about what's in the spreadsheet, but my biggest best practice is to be as granular as possible. We record everything by section, and we put in a lot of information about each listing in the spreadsheet so that we can do more with the data when we want to. We record instructor name so we can reach out to these instructors, let them know the impact that they're having. If we ever want to break things out by department, we can, because it's in a separate field. If we ever want to break things out by like course level, 100, 200, 300, 400, we can do that because that's its own field. All of the course information is combined into a unique ID in case we want to put this into a database in the future and have it work with other systems. And then we do the savings calculations directly in the spreadsheet. I record enrollment from the campus information system. We use a generic $100 savings unless we know the cost of the book that's being replaced, and then we use that instead. And then I also make sure to include a report date, and that basically it's just insurance in case the enrollment changes later on. Like the end of semester enrollment is different. We have a date that we capture the information here, and that's where the information is coming from. And not captured is the information about the grants. So each course is tied to a unique name that's given for each of the grants, and that allows us to report information about the grants instead of just individual sections. So it seems like an awful lot of work, and it doesn't take as long as expected. It's pretty easy to go in and grab stuff, but it is manual labor. But it's worth it to us because it makes it a lot easier to report on the savings and the number of students that we're helping, and do different things. So for the last couple of years, we've been asked by the Ohio Department of Higher Education to contribute some information to an efficiency report for the university. Basically looks at ways that we're trying to save students money. So OER and course reserves and other things plays pretty heavily into that. And luckily we have all this information, and it's in a format that makes it really easy to just filter by semester, and either give them an aggregate calculation. Sometimes like the format changes every year, so it's good that we have things divvied up the way that we do in the spreadsheet, because we can aggregate courses if we want to. We can show it by section if we want to. It's all really easy to do either by filtering or using pivot tables where you kind of build a report. Another thing that we've done that seems to be appreciated is send a thank you letter to faculty each semester that shows them the enrollment for the grant that they're responsible for or that they're awarded, as well as the savings for the semester, and then also like a cumulative, here's how many students you've helped. And that extends to sections that they don't teach. So they might have been awarded the grant and then they get other faculty to use that OER. We count that as something that's tied to their grant. So it's nice to do it, I'm sure they appreciate it, but we also think it's a tool for them to use in their promotion dossiers. And in the past, I believe we've copied department heads as well. So we compile the information in a pivot table, and then we plug that into a mail merge. So it really doesn't take too long to send this out to the faculty who are have a grant that's like in an active course. And then something we're doing now is starting to look specifically at the return on investment for individual grants, because we're interested, because it's something that kind of lines up with language that higher ups in the university use, administration, who might be more concerned with the dollars and cents. But this is pretty simple to do using a pivot table as well. And overall, again, my advice to you is keep things as granular as possible. You'll never know when you might want to break things down in a certain way. So having the spreadsheet or database, whatever, structured that way makes it easier to do so. I have worked with my students in some cases. I have a lab that I coordinate. And so in some cases, I've had them do data entry like this. And while it is menial, it's not super exciting, kind of walking them through how we use the information in the spreadsheet, as well as showing them how some of the formulas work, calculating values, combining values. It's a nice professional skill that students can get from a project like this. So I think there is some value to that. All right, I am going to pass things off to Beth now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Piwkowski. I do course reserves, and I also work in our special collections department. I also work the circulation desk. So I get to see the front and back end of things. I do a lot of the behind the scenes work, maintaining our course reserves offerings and textbook center materials. So that includes textbooks, as Mandi mentioned earlier, that are owned by the library, and also materials provided by faculty. I really appreciate it when faculty show up and say, I want my students to have this book to use. They don't have to buy it, especially when they've written it. And it's always very nice of them. We also have ebooks, streaming media, other materials we've purchased to supplement instruction, as well as journal articles and additional course materials, handouts, and PowerPoints. And so next slide. Sorry. So we create and update listings for all materials on SpringShare, and that's where the students can find all that information in one place. It includes catalog links to hard copies and electronic resources. I also check every semester to be sure links still work. Some of you may have had the issue with Wiley, was that last fall, when too many unpleasant surprises as for them or for us. So along with that, every semester we compare what's on the textbook list provided by the bookstore. I also use CampusNet, like Ben does, to figure out what classes are being taught, so that we can get started on that earlier and be ready for the fall, for the next semester. We also inform faculty that when there's materials available to them, as Mandi mentioned earlier. And some faculty have used this for years. There's some listings I just renew every semester because I know they're going to be teaching it again. Others aren't aware that this isn't even an option. We've had a lot of retirements. There isn't as much institutional memory over the last few years. And some departments are way more receptive than others. And I also have my own spreadsheet to keep track of things, mostly materials and communication with faculty. And I work with somebody else on this. So that's how we coordinate workflow. Next slide. And so there's some challenges, as I'm sure there is for everyone else working in this world. I had mentioned that faculty, not everyone knows what's available to them. We don't have as many department secretaries who kind of keep everyone in the know. There's been faculty turnover and decreased institutional memory and increased reliance on adjuncts. Sometimes people don't know what class they're teaching until the beginning of the semester, and sometimes they're using a different book, and I'm not always made aware of that. Other faculty have moved over to Blackboard or have opted for inclusive access materials, which kind of that push from textbook companies has really undercut a lot of the work we're doing, and I'm sure we're not the only ones that's happening to. So we're constantly trying to stay ahead and let faculty know that there's other ways to do things that really benefit their students. I also have to stay within boundaries of copyright law to let people know I can't scan this entire book and make it available. Stay within fair use. And there are difficulties in quantifying impact for students. I see students checking out the textbooks on a regular basis at the circulation desk, but the data does not always reflect the entire picture. Next slide. And so I have also had issues with tracking affordable learning materials. I picked this, became head of this job in 2021, and there were a lot of workflow things we had to work through, and certain statistics that were being gathered were fundamentally useless. So finding ways to make that work and working with my coworkers to find better ways to do that and to kind of combine our knowledge has been an ongoing process and a really, really good one. And because the data I have access to doesn't always work for what we need. SpringShare provides data on how many times course listings and items have been accessed through the URL, but that doesn't reflect people going through the direct catalog link or other ways. And then our circulation system, we use Sierra, provides data on circulating hard copies only and not electronic resources and other materials. Next slide. And so we've been doing a lot of problem solving, as I mentioned before, working with end users, faculty, and staff, and helping them troubleshoot issues that they're having has given me a better sense of what the needs are on campus. And it also provides some face-to-face interaction with other parties involved. And I really appreciated my coworkers who were also in this presentation for their input and their ideas and the information that they've provided that have really helped me to improve this process as it goes along. And yeah, thanks for listening, and thanks to them.
Okay, we're gonna do another quick kind of poll in the chat, and it looks like some of you, the chat has been busy, and I think we're trying to keep up with it. But if you want to put in, how are you tracking affordability programs? And you can provide examples, you can elaborate on, feel free to provide some detail if you want to. Again, the chat's going to be available too, so we hope this can be a resource for everyone. If you have links to send, any like informational pages about how you track or also how you report your impact, I'd be interested in seeing that. We'll take another 45 seconds. So a couple other institutions look like they do some sort of return on investment for the reserve program, or on the stipend program is something different for reserve. I'm not going to report out everything. I'm just seeing things that come up. If there's any tools that you use too, you could share those. Someone uses Airtable and they've shared a free template. That's really cool. Okay, you can keep sharing, but I'm going to turn things now over to Hannah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Hannah Pearson. I'm the collection management and acquisitions librarian here at CSU. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been very fun to see what other people are doing. So thank you for participating. I'm so pleased. I'm sure everyone else is too. So in this next section, I'm going to define the textbook affordability data management problem as we experienced it at Cleveland State. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the project management side of our fledgling database solution. So I'm going to be discussing the project management and conceptual aspects of developing a database solution. And then my colleague Ian Yee will talk more about the technical side of that. I did come over from to librarianship. I worked as a non-programming member of a software development team, and I think that's part of why we're headed in the direction that we're currently headed. But I am very lucky to have colleagues who know what they're doing more than I do. So just to talk about what the problem is, our systems are very siloed. A lot of people, previous presenters have talked a lot about how they're siloed, and it can be difficult. They don't talk to each other. Our catalog right now doesn't talk to course reserve systems. SpringShare and the catalog don't connect with our institutional systems for managing students and courses. Across course reserves, collections, and the OER grant project, there are a lot of people working independently. And in this process, we were collecting the same data multiple times, like our bibliographic data and our course enrollments. And again, everyone has talked about this too. Data collection was highly manual. So a number of us were cross-referencing the list of required text against the bookstore that we receive, or against the list that we receive from the bookstore.
across spreadsheets we generate from our integrated library system, or ILS. You've also probably heard it called Sierra and the catalog at this point. Those are all pretty interchangeable. We do have innovative interfaces Sierra right now and are facing down a system migration. And then we were also looking at the university's course enrollment system. So we do get a list of list of required textbooks from the bookstore in a spreadsheet every year. And then our cataloging librarian, our head of cataloging, uses that ISBN list and also some cataloging magic and wizardry with titles and OCLC numbers to match that against what we have in our collection. And I believe Beth also does some manual checking and compiling, especially for like English. We might have a very different edition that's still a usable text for some of the literary works there. So talk to your cataloging librarian about ISBN matching if you're interested in automating that process. And one of the other problems is that our ILS, and Ben referred to this too, only provides snapshots. So it's not possible for us to get retrospective data. I can't see what affordable course materials we had on reserve 3 years ago, unless somebody had the foresight to export that data at that time. What is the bottom line here? All of this means that we're not able to present a holistic picture of our impact, especially for library licensed ebooks and our print textbook reserves. So if I could get the next slide, please. Okay, so once I became aware that all of us had separate spreadsheets, and there was all this manual effort around managing our data, I felt very strongly, very strong conviction that we needed to move to a database solution. And I wanted to think very hard about what this ideal solution would look like and what it would be able to do for us. So in a perfect world, the data management solution would be able to ingest and organize data from all of our different sources, eliminate that redundant effort between departments, eliminate manual errors. I'm sure there are some, we're only human. Serve as a single point of truth for affordability data. So depending on, when you pull that number and what there's a lot of variation that's possible because things are always changing, right? Like your circulation's always changing, your ebook usage is always changing, your course enrollments are always changing. So it can be difficult to know what is going on, systematically. We also wanted to automate the collection management and course reserves reporting. Beth and I both do, and now a third person work on maintenance of the textbook center to keep it, up to date as insofar as possible, and get old editions out, and try and figure out what new editions we might want to get. We also wanted to generate a list of courses with affordable materials. I'm very interested in that because I think it could tie into course markings. Though I don't know if Mandi handled this question. There's been some weird political stuff around that I don't really get, but I will leave it at that. But we need that list to do course markings, right? And we also want to calculate that ROI for our grants that Ben is currently doing. But as a collections person, I would really like to see the ROI for our library ebooks as well. So next slide, please. Okay, this all sounds great, right? But it's a really tall order. So how do we get from our current state, which is not bad. I just want to say that, we do, I think, pretty well. Ben has done a great job with the grant data. Mandi's done a great job. But gosh, it's a lot of work, isn't it? So how can we get from here to over there to our possible solution? All right, next slide. Okay. First, I want to say, as you're thinking about a solution, it's important to acknowledge you're not going to be able to do it on your own, and you are going to need help. This is a thing that I struggle with. But when I first began designing a database solution, I tried to stick to what I could do on my own. But as I started sharing my ideas and talking about what I wanted to do with others, and I got feedback, it became very clear to me that, one, I didn't have to do it on my own, and two, I should not do it on my own. We should do it together, right? So if you're interested in improving your existing database or your existing data management practices, I think a great place to start is take an inventory of your existing relationships. And these don't all have to be your specific individual relationships. You can kind of tap into the collective network with others you know on your campus who are working on textbook affordability and OERs. I think there are 3 relationships that are critical to having good data management for your textbook affordability efforts, especially outside of OERs. One is your colleagues in systems cataloging, course reserves, and collections e-resources. So it's we can, this is my wheelhouse, right? And Beth's, where we can get that bibliographic and item data out of the catalog for you. We can get circulation for physical items. We can also get usage data for ebooks and other online resources. And we can also do some back-end improvements to make data collection, to get cleaner data and more consistent data. And that's something Beth and I have been working on over the last year or so. The other the other relationship that is a big deal is that list of required text. I do not think it's possible to do the automation if you cannot get a list of required text from your bookstore. This can also include information on inclusive access and course codes, like if they're using those access codes, and that can help drive collections decisions. So I'll talk a little bit more about that bookstore relationship in a bit, but that's very critical in doing some of the work we're doing with our affordable materials outside of open educational resources. And then the third is institutional research. So it is so much easier and faster to just to get a big list of courses. And we actually just got a list of every single course section that was offered for the fall semester and the enrollment after the census date. You know, every university is structured differently. But at our university, there's just a web form. I put in a web form request, and about a month later, I had our spreadsheet. So your mileage may vary depending on how accessible your institutional research is, but ours has been great about responding in a timely fashion. I do want to mention, for the bookstore, if you are having trouble establishing a relationship with the bookstore and they're being difficult, you should have the vice president or some such over your external vendor relationships. Ours is called like hospitality or something like that, but somebody in your administration is responsible for that relationship. And if you can figure out who they are and connect with them directly or through your director or your provost or whoever is appropriate, they can kind of smooth the way for you to get that data. That's really why somebody at some point, we had a really great person over that who established that relationship and was a very strong advocate for the library in that. And so it set a precedent that this is how this is done. And I think without that, we wouldn't have a lot of what we've done today. So that relationship is very important. All right, next slide. Okay, last slide for me today. I'm gonna share what I guess might constitute a project management framework. This is based pretty much exclusively on our experiences with project management. And I'm not an expert on project management. So again, your mileage may vary. There's kind of 3 phases that we move through as we've worked on this project specifically. One is identifying stakeholders, 2 is surveying the landscape, and 3 is planning, and then collecting feedback on your plan. So even though I've said 1, 2, 3, these aren't necessarily sequential, and you might cycle through the phases multiple times. I know we have. I think I actually started at planning and had to go back, and I just stakeholders when it became clear I wasn't going to be able to do a secret database project in my office by myself. So when you're identifying your stakeholders, I think it's helpful to think of them in terms of internal to the library and external to the library. So internally at our library, acquisitions, collections, our OER librarians, and course reserve staff are all involved in the day-to-day management of affordable course materials. And in developing a database data management solution, our system staff have the technical skills and expertise needed to do that. And thankfully, they're also interested in doing that. So that is very, very fortunate. Outside of the library, there are different faculty groups that are interested in textbook affordability. We really have to communicate our impact to university administration. I think we're struggling with that inclusive access marketing branding campaign just as much as anyone else. And then in Ohio, has been alluded to earlier, we do have to make a report to our State Department of Higher Education annually. So communication with your stakeholders can be as involved as multiple one-on-one conversations. So Beth and I have talked a lot. And it can be as simple as just looking at the report requirements from previous years from your state government institution. You know, you don't have to have multiple one-on-one conversations with them. So that's identifying stakeholders, surveying the landscape. I think it's a good idea to get a sense of the terrain and the resources you're going to be dealing with. You want to think about, I'm sure you already do this, you want to think about the general attitude towards open education on your campus and what avenues you might have to build partnerships. I think the most important question at this phase is kind of to ask yourself, what do you need? Wants and nice to haves are great. I encourage you to think about that at this point too, but you have to be honest with yourself about which is which. So one of the things that I gave up that was one of my wants was ebook usage statistic aggregation. That's not what we would call minimal viable product, but maybe one day our ILS will do what it's supposed to when we migrate. And that'll leave it at that. You may also want to ask yourself questions like, in an ideal world, what would we be doing? What wouldn't we be doing? I would not be doing manual data entry in an Excel spreadsheet, for sure. If I could wave a magic wand, what is one thing I would change? I have done this question before in different collections contexts. I recommend if you're cash strapped, you say you can't change the budget because everyone will just pick the budget. But maybe that doesn't apply so much here. And then planning and collecting feedback. So once you have a kind of a read on what is going on, consider what is the easiest and simplest option to solve your problem. You don't want to do what IT people call gold plating, which is put a bunch of unnecessary stuff on top of what you actually need. And it may be that you don't need a database. You may just need a shared spreadsheet. We've made a lot of great progress with shared spreadsheets. And then consider whether your solution is feasible. We're fortunate enough here to have the staff with technical expertise in order to create a database solution. But if you don't already have those skills among your staff, you might want to consider other options like Microsoft Access, which is what I was going to do early on. But luckily, I think Ian will talk about why we're finding something that's going to be a better fit for us going on. I would also encourage you to think of ways you can break your project into smaller pieces so that you can get value from your work, even if you can't finish the whole thing. So for us, staff time is a major concern. So it may be that one day, Jeff, who is doing most of the database, a lot of the heavy lifting with the database, may not be able to work on it. So in our case, Jeff was able to create a script that reformats the Excel spreadsheet we get from the bookstore into a monster that it comes out and it's kind of gross. It's got merged cells, things are on multiple lines. You cannot plug it into a pivot table, right? So Jeff's script turns it into something we can manipulate in Excel without having to retype the spreadsheet, right? As you're planning and doing these things, check in with your stakeholders as frequently as makes sense, and make sure you're actually meeting their needs and that the solution works for them. And I mean that in the sense of, if you come up with an answer that is going to create a lot of manual data entry work for someone, that may not work for them, right? So we just keep checking in. And that is all I have for you today. So now that I've covered the project planning side, I'm going to hand things over to Ian, who will discuss the more technical aspects of implementing a project like this.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Yee. Title is Network Support Specialist to the Library Systems Department at Cleveland State University. Hannah mentioned Jeff Bweck, who's actually doing most of the programming work. I'm doing a little bit more of the sysadmin work, but as everybody is probably familiar, IT guys usually end up doing a little bit of everything. So anyway, just to kind of reiterate what Hannah said earlier, there really isn't a perfect silver magic bullet solution. Everybody has different use cases. People are different organizations, different skill sets, different resources available. So what we have here, fortunately, we had some skill, some data wrangling, data cleaning. It's important to keep open lines of communication with everybody involved. As Hannah said, in the sort of the project management side of it, kind of reiterate, maybe do a little bit of circling back and forth just to really keep lines of communications clear. So here at the library, we actually do use III, Clarivate, Procrest, Ex Libris, Sierra. It's actually on premises and self-hosted. So we have the systems administration experience. Next slide, please. To work with the data out of Sierra. So kind of like Hannah mentioned, Microsoft Access, one of the things we did not choose because we did earlier on in the library's history, we did actually use Microsoft Access and what's now called Classic ASP by Microsoft to do a web interface on top of that, and just not really particularly scalable and really doesn't work well past 1 or 2 users. We were also looking at OpenRefine briefly, and still might be a viable option depending on how things go. It's an open source program formerly known as Google OpenRefine for doing data management, data cleanup, kind of data wrangling, mangling, however you want to call it. So as far as our current, honestly, it's kind of pre-alpha stage. We're still starting to implement small pieces of it. Decided to go with free open source software. I mean, there's a huge overlap between sort of the philosophy of free open source software and open educational resources. So that's something. The operating system we're using right now for the server is Linux, because like I said before, we're an on-premises self-hosted Sierra instance. So we have the staff and server capability of managing that and just doing the systems administration work on that. The database we're using is PostgreSQL. It's a free open source software database. We used it in a few other smaller programs earlier on, so that's where the staff and programming experience comes in. And it's actually also the database backend of III Sierra, which is a commercial proprietary product. So, sometimes some of the software vendors you have to pay extra to get API access. So this is kind of our semi-secret end run possibility around getting access to the data. So if necessary, I can just go in and do a database dump and work from that. And using a database server, regardless of whether it's going to be PostgreSQL or MySQL, MariaDB, lets you use different programming languages to access it. I think I saw earlier in the chat somebody mentioned Power BI. You can't use Power BI to connect to PostgreSQL. Hannah mentioned Jeff Breck is using Python for that cleanup script, but you can also use PHP. So that's kind of, like I say, in our pre-alpha stage. We're still working on trying to manage all that. So that's pretty much it for that. We're running close to time.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian. So we have a short amount of time for questions, but I know at least I can stick around after the official end time. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. And you can enter chat. You can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question over your microphone, or you can just enter questions into the chat.
I think one thing I wanted to mention is that Jeff, Ian, and I have discussed making the solution, if we can get something workable, available as open source software. So we are taking some design steps to make it not so specific to Cleveland State. I don't want to make any promises, but I'm sure we'll, watch this space and we'll let you know where we end up. It may be we run out of time or it doesn't work or whatever, but I'm cautiously optimistic. We got an email from Jeff that he is scripting the database this week, so fingers crossed on that.
Thanks, Anna. Andrew has a question in the chat. Have you done much with DFW, drop fail withdrawal rates, and other metrics of student success? We haven't done much. We did do an initial investigation around the time that we were working with institutional research to get like the big data dump. If I recall, the results weren't particularly interesting at the time one way or another, but we would like to revisit that at some time. And that was another reason that we wanted like really meticulous tracking every single section and having all that like unique identifier information so that we could connect it back if we wanted to.
I will say I'm super interested in that because institutional research has a student success database and they are using oh my gosh, what is that called? Tableau. They're using Tableau over their data. So it's possible, I doubt they will let us hook into their data, but it's possible they could hook into our database with Tableau and start, doing some of that visualization stuff. So I'm very excited about that, but we haven't, we'll probably need a database before we can start having that conversation, right? But I think there's a lot of potential there.
Ken had a question in the Q&A and I can respond to it via text. But the question is, do you have a dashboard or some other visualization method for sharing the OER impact report publicly? Mandi might be able to speak to this better if you want to, talking about the report that you create. But we do have a designer who works in e-learning who has created a nice like infographic about our different efforts, and then we send that to, among other people, to the provost, or we have sent it to the provost in the past. Mandi, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I mean, yeah, it's just a document that we send, but I would love to have a dashboard of some kind. Anali has a question about my people database. I don't spend a lot of time on putting a lot of detail into it. I try to just enter things in as they happen very quickly, and that's how I can keep on top of it because, it can be, we all have a lot of work to do, so it can be hard to keep up with it otherwise.
I haven't done this in practice, but I know that some people use either Notion or Obsidian as like a customer relationship management system, which might give you a little bit more flexibility in terms of how you link different like entities in the database together than just using a list. But I'm sure a list is easier to use than something. I'll give a personal recommendation for Obsidian in terms of building any kind of like a personal knowledge system, but it's an individual product. It's not built for sharing it with other people. And Notion does have a feature.
I was gonna jump in and say, I used the free personal version of Notion I'm not managing people like Mandi is, but I do use Notion to link people with tasks and with different things. So that's I have to have it all externalized, right? And I also want to say about the visualization stuff is I have tried Power BI in a different context, and gosh, it was hard to use. So I am, you mentioned maybe we can hang on to our institutional research folks Tableau subscription, and I am very hopeful, yes. And that also that they would do the work of setting up the Tableau. So we'll see, because we have to have a data source for them before they can do that, but I think it'll be really great. And I see we're running out of time. I can stay a little bit longer if people have questions too, but thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate your participation.
And just a reminder about the chat, on this slide, there will be a link to what is now just an empty document. But that will be, all of our chat interactions will be there. So I think a lot of people shared a lot of really useful insights and links and tools. So thank you.